New York City, baby. Ah, New York City.
I'm gonna tell you why I'm not leaving New York City to go to a small town while I do my makeup. I am at work and I like to do my makeup when I get to work so that I look fresh. Okay, it's my first time doing this, so bear with me. You probably could already tell that. But anyway, okay. So one of the main reasons that I'm not going to a small town is because I literally just came from one. Like, I just left my hometown of Cincinnati to come to New York City. And I had to look it up to see like what they consider to be like a small town. And a small town is basically any city where the population is less than 250,000 people. So even though Cincinnati is not a small town, it's just a lot of reasons why I don't want to go back there or any place smaller than that. And let me tell you why. The culture. There's like a lack of culture when you live in a small town. And I'm not saying that there aren't like different ethnicities, but all the ethnicities act the same. Like, everybody does the same thing. Like, we're all sitting in traffic at the same time. We're all going to lunch at the same time. And then by like 8 o'clock at night, the streets are clear because everybody's at home eating dinner or whatever they're doing. Like, they're just not outside. And it's like Groundhog's Day every single day.
All right, I had to find a place with some better lighting so I could continue to talk to you. The quality of life is just so much better in a big city. And even though you pay more money to live in a big city, and you get more for your money when you live in a small town, even though I can get a bigger house, you know, I have to trade culture for the bigger house. I have to trade assimilating for a bigger house or more space. I have to give up, you know, my creativity for that, because I don't really feel like small towns embrace artists. Like, if you're not an artist and, you know, you get some job or you're in a relationship or you have kids and you want to move to a small town so that your kids can have a better quality of life, then that's dope. You should do that, because the grass always seems greener on the other side, but really it's not. It's not greener on the other side. It most definitely is not. And that was one thing that I learned leaving New York City and going to a small town. I don't feel like even during COVID that I'm worse off for being in New York City than if I went to a small town. And I feel like even though we were hit the hardest, I feel like we handled it the best. I feel like living in a small town made me even more of an introvert because I wasn't allowed to be an individual. Well, not that I wasn't allowed, but I feel like people made a big deal about the fact that I didn't want to do what everybody else was doing. You know, I didn't want to have small talk about BS because I wasn't interested in that. I don't really feel like living in a small town was good for me. It made me even more introverted. It made me even more, you know, shy. And I'm really having to work hard to come out of that shell. I feel like introverts are bullied in small towns. I feel like small towns are so intolerant and they can only accept you if you are exactly like them. And if you're not, they hate you for it. I was always that kid that would stand up for the kid that was being bullied. I don't feel like small towns are made for introverts. I feel like introverts run from small towns. We do. Aside from the racism and the prejudice that I experienced as a Black woman, you know, in a small town, that's not something that I feel like should be taken lightly. You know, especially when you're used to living in a big city, the mentality is just different. You know, I felt like when I was in Ohio, I feel like the Black people had Stockholm syndrome. I really do. I felt like they had just reconciled themselves to the idea that white people were superior. I just wasn't used to living in New York. Like, that's just not how Black people in New York operate. You know, if anything, they see something going down like an injustice, they'll speak up. They won't just be complicit. And now that I'm back here, if I go somewhere else to live, like when I have children, it definitely wouldn't be a small town, because I'm a black woman. I'm a woman of color, and that's never going to change. And it's always going to be something that I'm gonna have to consider wherever I wanna go, which is why I always would choose to live in a big city like New York City, because even though there is still racism, it's not as bad. And that's a shame that I have to even think on those levels, or that, people of color have to think on those levels, but that's our reality. Like, where are things like the least offensive? Like, that's where we want to be, where it's the least offensive. And I'm not trying to assimilate that on top of the fact, of being a gay woman. It's like, when you go to a small town, it's like you got to pick one. You're going to be black and you're going to be a woman. That's enough. That's enough hurdles to climb over. You can't add in your sexuality. Like, that's just too many things. And one of those things isn't going to be taken care of. I found it very difficult to find a good hairdresser or a nail tech. And then when I did find them, they were charging so much money because there was less competition. So it was a struggle. And then they were charging more money, but then the quality of work wasn't as good, because there's nothing to look at. Like, I just found myself so uninspired as an artist. Like, there was just nothing to look at. And there's so much to look at here. Like, look at this view. It's a lot to feel like you're the only one, Like, you're just so different from everyone else, and they can see it from a mile away. And I feel like if you're not willing to assimilate into a small town's way of life, then it's not going to work out for you. And I feel like when I was living in a small town, I just found myself coping instead of living and thriving. I feel like now that I've come back to New York City, I'm living and I'm thriving. Even during COVID, like, I still have been able to find ways to take care of my mental health. And people don't have conversations about mental health in Ohio. They think you're a weirdo if you talk like that. Weirdo is just like or different. Oh, that's different. Like, I would hear that so much that it just made me feel like, okay, I just need to go to work and I need to come home and I don't need to talk to anybody. And I'm already kind of like that because I'm an introvert, and I feel like you have to travel outside of your area and see what life is like so you can be more humble. I don't feel like you can really learn humility when everyone is like you, because you never have to change and you never have to grow. I can't tell you how much I've grown living in New York City as opposed to when I was in a small town. And that's another reason why I would never go back there, because you can't go home again. For now, New York is my home. It's where I feel the most accepted and celebrated. I don't feel like people judge me for being different. I'm allowed to just be who I want to be, and I feel like everyone should just be allowed to be who they want to be, whoever you are, whoever that is.